The HOA has always been a pain in the ass, but I was used to the annoying letters, the ridiculous fines, and the meetings that felt like a fifth-rate theater. But blocking my farm with 3 bulldozers? That was a whole new category of absurdity. I returned home after a weekend away, already planning a hot bath and a decent dinner, when I came across the most ridiculous scene I've ever seen. 3 gigantic excavators were positioned at the entrance to my property, as if they were royal guards preventing me from passing through. A group of gossipy neighbors were gathered across the street, whispering and pointing as if they were watching the final episode of a dramatic soap opera. And right in the middle of it all, of course, was her, with her arms crossed, huge sunglasses, and that expression of pure satisfaction on her face. If she could, she probably would have made a triumphant speech about how she had finally put the neighborhood in order. But all she managed to do was push my patience to the limit. I stopped the car slowly, trying to process the idiocy of what was happening. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe I was too tired and seeing things. But no, they were still there. The bulldozers, the blockade, the arrogant woman waiting to tell me some bullshit that would only make my blood boil faster. I got out of the car and stood there, arms crossed, just watching. I wanted to see how far she would go with this madness. And, of course, it wasn't long before she started her show. "You've been notified several times," she began, with that tone of someone who thinks she has the power of a queen. "Your farm is at odds with community standards." I blinked again. "Excuse me? Your land. The rustic look is not appropriate for the neighborhood. You should have fenced it in, pruned it, and maintained the aesthetics of the neighborhood. But you refused to cooperate. Now, we take action. Action. Of course, because putting 3 huge excavators to block off my property was a completely reasonable measure to correct its appearance. I took a deep breath, feeling my patience melt like ice cream on asphalt. I had expected trouble ever since this woman took over the leadership of the HOA, but this insanity was a new record. As I stared at the ridiculous blockade, I wondered what exactly she thought was going to happen. Did she think I was going to sigh and say, "Wow, you're right. Thanks for confiscating my entrance. I'll go and renovate it right away to please your sensitive eyes"? Or did she simply not know who she was dealing with? Because, you see, I own this whole county. That's right, every piece of land in this little town, including the land where all those HOA houses were built, was bought by my family decades ago. Over the years, we've sold some parts, kept others, but one thing has never changed. I have more influence over this place than anyone could imagine. In fact, the HOA was set up on land that technically still belonged to my company. Yes, the association itself existed because I let it. And this woman thought she could intimidate me? I held back a laugh. Not because I thought it was funny, but because the situation was so pathetically absurd that I only had 2 options: laugh or lose my patience for good. But I'm a patient man. Instead of yelling or arguing, I calmly picked up my cell phone, took some pictures of the excavators, and started making some calls. She kept watching me, probably waiting for me to start begging her to let me through. But I didn't even look in her direction. I just did what any sensible person would do when their property is invaded. I called my lawyers. She didn't know it, but she was about to learn an unforgettable lesson. I've never been a man to make a fuss. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that real power doesn't need to shout. Real power speaks softly, gives quiet orders, and watches as others panic. And that's exactly what was about to happen. While I made a few calls, the woman continued to stand there, with the arrogant posture of someone who thinks she's won a war. With each passing minute, more neighbors gathered to watch the show, whispering and looking at me as if they were expecting an explosion. They weren't going to have that show. The first person to take my call was my lawyer, a man who dealt with this kind of situation as if he were solving a basic math problem. He listened to my story, asked a few questions, and, in the end, said just 3 words that made me smile. "Leave it to me." So I made my second call. This one was to the mayor's office. After all, if the HOA was using heavy construction equipment to block my entrance, something was very wrong. It took the employee on the other end of the line a moment to understand what I was talking about. When I mentioned the HOA and its excavators, I heard a nervous hiss. What did they do? They're blocking my property. 3 excavators, all without permission. But they don't have authorization for this kind of action. That's right. I suggest someone come and sort it out before I have to do it my way. The promise of bureaucratic confusion worked. In less than 10 minutes, an official town hall car turned up, followed by a police vehicle. Now things were getting fun. When the woman saw the officers approaching, her confidence wavered for a second. But, like anyone who thinks they're untouchable, she quickly pulled herself together, turned to the officers, and started talking before they could even ask her anything. "I'm glad you're here," she said, as if she had called the officers to a tea party. "We're finally taking action on this illegal property." The policeman looked at her, then at me, then at the bulldozers. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "So," he began, cocking an eyebrow, "do you have permission for this?" "We don't need permission," she replied, with a smug smile. "As a community association, we are acting within our rights to ensure that all properties comply with the regulations." The silence that followed was delicious. The policeman sighed deeply, the kind of sigh one lets out when one realizes one is about to deal with an alarming level of stupidity. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "blocking someone's driveway with bulldozers is not standard enforcement procedure. But this property, it doesn't belong to the HOA, and even if it did, you would need official authorization for any action of this kind." The woman blinked a few times, as if her brain was slowly processing the fact that maybe, just maybe, she had made a gigantic mistake. But the best was yet to come. I remained silent the whole time, watching the scene with a discreet smile. Then, when I saw that it was my cue, I finally spoke. "I was hoping you'd figure this out on your own, but I think I'll make it easier for everyone." I took out my cell phone and showed a scanned document that had been ready for some time. A title deed, with my name on it. "This land," I pointed calmly, "is mine. All of it. And more than that, the HOA exists here, because I let it." The silence was so absolute that I could almost hear the sound of the woman's brain melting. She looked at the document, then she looked at me, then she looked at the neighbors, who were now watching everything with a mixture of horror and amusement. That can't be right," she said. But her voice no longer had the same arrogance as before. "But it is. You should have done your research before bringing heavy machinery onto my property without permission." Now the policeman was no longer just annoyed. He was officially fed up with the situation. "Madam, at the moment, the only thing you have achieved is an investigation for trespassing and possible damage to private land." The color disappeared from the woman's face. The little gathering of neighbors, who once seemed to be cheering for a big punishment against me, was now getting restless. Some began to move away discreetly, as if they had realized they were on the wrong side of history. The woman, however, still hadn't given up completely. You can't just ignore the community rules." Now I laughed. I couldn't hold it back. "Community? Darling, this community is on my land. I own everything here. If I wanted to, I could ask you to remove the entire HOA, and you wouldn't be able to stop it." Her eyes widened like plates. It was at that moment that she realized she had made a gigantic mistake. I could see the panic growing in her eyes, but she still tried to hold her pose, as if she could twist the facts until they made sense to her again. But it was too late for that. The policeman started arguing with the excavator operators, asking who had authorized it. One of the operators, a guy who was clearly only there because he'd been ordered to, raised his hands in surrender. "The lady here hired us. She said she had permission." The policeman sighed once more. "So, basically, you hired construction machinery to invade and block private property without permission?" The operator looked at the woman. The woman looked at me. I smiled. "I think we have a problem here," I finished, and for the first time that day, The woman didn't have a ready answer. It was amazing how this woman's arrogance evaporated at the same speed as her trouble increased. After the revelation that I was the true owner of that piece of land, and, by extension, of the entire piece that the HOA thought it governed, she stood there, motionless, her face alternating between shock, disbelief, and that silent despair of someone who has realized that they have just made a very big mistake. And I hadn't even started having fun yet. While the policeman tried to understand the size of the mess she had caused, I just watched. The excavator operator, who clearly didn't want to be there, was already scratching the back of his head and taking slow steps backwards, trying to get out of the way before the shit splashed onto him. The neighbors, once excited by the circus, were now scattering like cockroaches when the lights go on. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who tried to fight the owner of the game. But unlike them, I wasn't leaving. Oh no, I was just getting started. Well, since we're all here, I began, crossing my arms and pretending to be as calm as possible, how about we talk about the next steps? The woman was still trying to formulate an answer, but the only thing that came out was a strange noise, something between a wheeze and a panicked sob. The older policeman, who looked ready to retire after that day, turned to me. "What exactly do you intend to do now?" Good question. I could have simply called a tow truck and removed the excavators. I could have called my lawyer and filed a quick lawsuit with the HOA. I could even have left it alone and moved on. But if there's one thing I've learned about people like this woman, it's that leaving it alone only encourages them to try the same shit again. So I decided to teach her a lesson. "Well," I said, feigning a thoughtful expression, "I think the first thing I want to know is exactly how much that little joke cost me." "Did it?" The policeman frowned. "Yes. After all, these heavy machines have been here blocking my property. They've prevented me from entering and, from what I can see, they've damaged the soil on my farm." The color faded a little more from the woman's face. Did you pay for those excavators to stay here?" I interrupted. She opened and closed her mouth 3 times, like a fish out of water. "Well, we at the HOA have a community fund for situations like this." It was like music to my ears. "Ah, so you used HOA money to hire bulldozers without permission to trespass on private property?" Her mouth closed immediately. The officer looked at her. Then he looked at me. "Do you want to file an official complaint?" I smiled. "Yes, I do. And not only that, I want a full audit into the use of HOA funds. Because, frankly, if this was paid for with community money, I wonder what else is hidden in the numbers." What little shred of dignity she still tried to maintain was completely destroyed at that moment. I could see the real fear taking hold of her. Because now, it was no longer just a question of a failed attempt to impose stupid rules. Now, we were talking about embezzlement, misuse of community resources. And, my friend, if there's one thing City Hall loves to investigate, it's HOAs sticking their hands where they don't belong. That's when she tried to change tactics. "Look, maybe we can solve this another way." Oh, of course. Now that the noose was tightening around her neck, she wanted to solve it. "Work it out?" I raised an eyebrow. "You blocked my farm, spent HOA money without authorization, and tried to impose rules on land that isn't even part of the community. What exactly do you want to negotiate?" She bit her lip and looked around, realizing that no one was on her side now. The policeman stepped forward. "Ma'am, I think you'd better cooperate and provide all the necessary documentation about this operation." The woman hesitated for a moment, then she huffed and crossed her arms. I'll need to consult our lawyer first." I almost laughed. She was screwed and she knew it. The policeman sighed and signaled to the other officers. "Right, let's open a formal investigation. And sir," he turned to me, "we're going to need your full statement." "No problem," I replied, smiling. Little by little, the excavator operators began to switch off their machines and get ready to leave. I could see pure relief on their faces at finally being able to get out of this mess. The woman, she didn't have that luxury. Because this battle was far from over. She just didn't know yet that I had saved my heaviest move for last. While the policeman moved the bulldozers away, I made a point of standing still, calmly observing everything. My aim now was to make it clear to her that I wouldn't be the kind of person to let a trespass attempt go by without a good lesson. The woman had played with fire, and now she was about to get burned. I could see that the situation was completely out of control. The neighbors, who had previously been watching the scene as if it were a play, began to disperse, clearly uncomfortable with what had happened. I was there, ready to make sure my position was clearly understood. It wasn't just about ego or revenge. It was about respect. The woman, who was now almost speechless, tried to keep her posture, but her eyes were panicked. Her red face, her panting breath, and the sweat dripping down her forehead indicated that she already knew she had gone too far. She tried to swallow her fear and put on her fakest smile, but it didn't work. Everyone could see that she was terrified. The older policeman approached again, with a look that seemed more tired than anything else. He knew what was at stake now, and the last thing he wanted was to have to deal with it any longer. "Ma'am, you need to understand that the actions you've taken today are completely unfounded," said the policeman with a patient tone, as if he were trying to avoid further confrontation. She looked at him as if she was expecting him to save her, but he continued to speak with a clarity that cut off any attempt at manipulation. "This is not your property. You have no right to impose your rules here. What's more, you've blocked someone else's access to their own land. That's trespassing, ma'am," he said, clearly tired of her insistence. "But I didn't know," she tried to argue, but her voice lacked strength. I could see the relief that was slowly spreading among the neighbors. They had realized that they were on the wrong side of history. I knew that, until that moment, many of them had probably been hoping that something would go wrong with my defense. They had no idea who really owned the place, but now they did, and the discomfort was evident on each of their faces. "You knew enough to block my access with 3 excavators and still spend community money without authorization," I said, in a calm but firm voice. "Now, you're going to pay for it." The woman, who had previously been trying to maintain her authoritative posture, was now practically begging for a way out. Her eyes were watery, and her voice faltered when she tried to speak again. I thought, "You thought wrong," I cut in, no longer having the patience for his excuse. "And now you're going to bear the consequences of your mistakes." The policemen, who were already irritated by the situation, began to move. The older one signaled to the other officer, and soon he moved away to make a few more calls. I knew what was coming next: an investigation into the misuse of HOA funds, possible property damage, and, of course, the legal consequences of illegally blocking someone's access to their own land. "Now," I said, turning my gaze to the police officer, "I want to make sure that all HOA funds are audited. We can't leave this mess without a full investigation. If there's something being hidden, I'm going to find out." The officer nodded, and once again began making his calls. The woman was now completely speechless. She looked at the policemen, the excavator operators, the neighbors, and, finally, at me. And deep in her eyes, I could see the realization that there was no longer any escape. The bulldozers finally left my property, and the woman, defeated, stood there alone. The circus she had set up was slowly falling apart, and she was being left to deal with the consequences. By now, the neighbors had moved away, not because they were on her side, but because they knew the situation was a mistake for everyone. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who dared to defy the owner of the county. She still tried to stand her ground, but now it was too late. I knew that no matter how hard she tried to regain control, she had already lost. I had no intention of letting it go. There was more at stake, and I was only just getting to grips with the situation. "You can go now." And with that, she walked away, her face still red with embarrassment, while I stood firm, watching the policemen and excavator operators begin to leave. I knew I had won, but I also knew that at some point, this story would come back to haunt me. And of course, if you liked this video, please comment and leave a like.